The door wasn't locked, and now her view of humans is forever altered. First contact complications. The environmental stabilizers on Stellaris Station hummed with an inconsistent frequency that made Zanara's sensitive auditory receptors twitch uncomfortably. After 2 full planetary rotations aboard this human outpost, she still couldn't adjust to the chaotic symphony of mechanical sounds that permeated every corridor. The station's very atmosphere seemed to vibrate with unpredictability, much like the humans themselves. Zanara adjusted her formal attire, a flowing garment of deep emerald that complemented the iridescent violet of her skin. As senior envoy for the Tholian Conclave, she maintained impeccable standards of presentation. Her slender frame moved with practiced precision as she navigated the curved pathways of the station, seeking the designated meditation chamber promised by the human administration, a necessary concession for Tholians whose telepathic abilities required regular recalibration in quiet spaces. According to the station schematic provided to her neural interface, the chamber should be located in the eastern quadrant, just beyond the research facilities, room 293A. The location indicator pulsed softly in her enhanced vision as she approached the door. Zanara placed her 6-fingered hand against the access panel, surprised when it immediately flashed green. On Folia Prime, sacred spaces required proper identification and authorization. Perhaps humans were less protective of their contemplative areas. The door slid open with barely a whisper, and Zanara stepped forward, only to freeze in place. This was decidedly not a meditation chamber. Standing before her, dripping wet and clad only in a small white towel around his waist, was a human male. Water droplets cascaded down his pale skin, his expression shifting from relaxation to startled surprise as he registered her presence. He began, reaching quickly for a larger towel hanging nearby. "This is my private quarter." Zanara's tertiary eyelid fluttered rapidly across her large almond-shaped eyes, a Tholian physiological response to extreme discomfort. She should leave immediately. She should apologize formally. She should report the mapping error to station administration. These were the logical steps. Instead, she stood transfixed, her violet skin darkening to a deep purple around her face. "Commander Petrov," she finally managed, recognizing the station's executive officer. "I was directed to the meditation chamber. There appears to be a critical error in my navigational data." Nikolai Petrov secured the towel around his waist, his composure returning with remarkable swiftness. Zanara found herself involuntarily cataloging the differences between his physiology and her own. The pinkish skin tone, the defined musculature structure, the curious patches of dark hair. Tholians were smoother, their bodies uniformly textured with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with emotional states. "No problem, Ambassador," he replied, running fingers through his damp auburn hair. "The meditation room is actually 293C, 2 doors down. Easy mistake with our numbering system." Zanara's extensive training in emotional regulation was failing spectacularly. Tholians prided themselves on maintaining perfect internal equilibrium. Physiological reactions kept firmly under control through lifelong discipline. Yet now her pulse accelerated, and an unfamiliar warmth spread across her face, causing her natural bioluminescence to pulse erratically. "My apologies for the intrusion," she said formally, backing toward the door. "I will leave you to your personal rituals." A slight smile appeared on Petrov's face. "No harm done. I'll see you at tomorrow's strategic planning session." "Yes, tomorrow." Zanara nodded stiffly before stepping back into the corridor, the door sliding shut between them. She stood motionless for several moments, her 4-chambered heart beating in an unusual pattern. Something profound had shifted within her, something beyond simple embarrassment or cultural misunderstanding. The sight of the human in his natural state had triggered responses she never experienced in 2 centuries of existence. Tholians were taught from childhood that their evolutionary superiority came from transcending physical attraction. Their reproductive processes had become clinical and detached generations ago, managed through genetic selection rather than emotional connection. Yet standing there in the sterile corridor of a human space station, Ambassador Zanara of the High Tholian Conclave felt a most primitive sensation stirring within her: curiosity. The meditation room would have to wait. She needed far more than standard telepathic alignment to process this disturbance. As she walked briskly back to her assigned quarters, Zanara knew with absolute certainty she would never view Commander Nikolai Petrov, or humans, in quite the same way again. The holographic display illuminated the conference chamber with a three-dimensional map of the disputed asteroid belt between Tholian and human territories. Zanara manipulated the projection with graceful gestures, her slender fingers leaving trails of light as she highlighted specific regions. The mineral deposits in Sector Gamma 9 present optimal conditions for a joint extraction initiative, she explained, her melodic voice carefully modulated. Tholian quantum resonance technology combined with human processing methods could increase efficiency by 43%. From across the oval table, Commander Petrov studied the projection with narrowed eyes. The radiation interference concerns me. Our shielding capabilities aren't as sophisticated as yours in those conditions. When he looked up, their gazes locked momentarily. Zanara felt that disconcerting warmth again spreading through her core, causing her bioluminescent patterns to pulse subtly beneath her formal attire. It had been 3 days since the incident in his quarters, and she had failed to meditate away the memory despite rigorous attempts. "We can provide supplementary shield generators," she offered, breaking eye contact abruptly. "They are compatible with your systems." Lieutenant Commander Reeves, the station's chief engineer, raised an eyebrow. "That's surprisingly generous, Ambassador. Previous Tholian delegations have been reluctant to share technology." "The mission's success benefits all parties," Zanara replied with practiced diplomatic neutrality. As the planning session progressed, Zanara became increasingly aware of Petrov's presence, the way his hands moved when emphasizing key points, the resonant quality of his voice, the occasional smile that transformed his features. These observations were entirely irrelevant to their diplomatic work, yet she found herself cataloging every detail. When the briefing concluded and the other officers filed out, Petrov approached her as she organized her data crystals. "Ambassador, do you have a moment?" Zanara's tertiary eyelid fluttered briefly before she controlled the reaction. "Of course, Commander." When they were alone, Petrov leaned against the edge of the table, his posture relaxed in a way no Tholian diplomat would ever permit in formal settings. "I've noticed some tension since our unexpected encounter the other day," he said directly. "I want to assure you that humans don't consider such incidents significant violations of privacy. There's no need for continued discomfort." Zanara clasped her hands before her, a formal Tholian gesture signaling composed attention. "Commander Petrov, I assure you Tholians do not experience discomfort in the human sense. Our neural pathways process embarrassment quite differently." Petrov tilted his head slightly. "Then why have you avoided direct eye contact for 3 days?" Her luminescent eyes widened slightly. Had her behavior been so transparent? "Cultural differences in communication protocols," she answered too quickly. "Nothing more." Petrov studied her face, clearly unconvinced. "My previous posting was on Proxima Station. I worked with Tholian representatives for 3 years. They maintained eye contact during conversations as a sign of respect." Zanara felt trapped. The emotional regulation techniques taught in diplomatic training were proving woefully inadequate. "Perhaps," she began, searching for words, "I am still adapting to human interaction patterns." Petrov pushed away from the table, approaching her with that direct manner humans often displayed. He stopped at a respectful distance, but close enough that Zanara could detect the faint scent of the station's standard-issue soap on his skin. "Ambassador, if I've done something to offend you—" "You have not," she interrupted uncharacteristically. "The fault is entirely mine. I must recalibrate my perspectives." Something in her tone made Petrov pause, his expression shifting from concern to a new awareness. For one terrifying moment, Zenara feared he might understand the true nature of her internal conflict. "Well," he said finally, his voice softer, "cultural adaptation goes both ways. I'm learning about Tholian customs too." As he turned to leave, Zenara found herself studying the strong line of his shoulders beneath his uniform. Another wholly inappropriate observation. "Commander," she called impulsively. He turned back. "The Tholian botanical specimens are being installed in the science bay tomorrow. Your perspective would be valuable." Petrov smiled, that transformative expression again. "I'll be there, Ambassador." As the door closed behind him, Zenara pressed a cool hand to her flushed cheek, wondering what madness had prompted that invitation and why she was already anticipating tomorrow with such inexplicable intensity. Crisis and revelation. The botanical installation had transformed into an unexpected social gathering. Scientists from both species mingled amid the newly transplanted flora, admiring the bioluminescent plants that cast an ethereal glow throughout the chamber. Zenara stood beside a crystalline tree from her homeworld, explaining its properties to an attentive group of human researchers when Commander Petrov entered. He had changed from his standard uniform into formal diplomatic attire, a gesture of respect that Zenara found unexpectedly touching. "Ambassador," he greeted, approaching with measured steps. "These specimens are remarkable. Some are 15,000 years old," she explained, watching his genuine fascination with pride. "They communicate through light patterns and molecular emissions." Petrov extended a hand toward the crystalline tree, stopping just short of touching it. "May I?" "You may." Zenara nodded. "It responds to bioelectric fields." When his fingers contacted the luminous surface, the tree brightened perceptibly, its intricate patterns pulsing in a rhythm that made Zenara's eyes widen. "It likes you," she said, surprise evident in her voice. Petrov grinned. First time for everything. The evening progressed with formal demonstrations of Tholian botanical harmonics, plants that created complex musical patterns when in proximity to compatible species. When the official presentation concluded, most attendees dispersed to the reception area, leaving Zenara and Petrov alone among the glowing flora. "Your species' connection to plant life is extraordinary," Petrov observed, walking alongside her through the winding path. "Humans have only begun to understand similar relationships in the last century." "We evolved differently," Zenara acknowledged. "Tholians developed communication with other species before we developed advanced technology." Petrov stopped beside a flowering vine whose blossoms changed color with atmospheric variations. "Is that why your diplomatic corps is so effective? This innate understanding of other life forms?" Zenara considered this. "Perhaps, though understanding humans has proven challenging." "How so?" Petrov asked, turning to face her fully. "Your species embraces emotional states that Tholians spend lifetimes learning to transcend," she explained cautiously. "You find strength in feelings we consider distractions." Petrov stepped closer, the botanical lights casting intriguing shadows across his features. "Like what?" Zenara hesitated. "Attraction, spontaneity, physical awareness." The air between them seemed to change density. Petrov studied her face with new intensity. "And Tholians don't experience these things." "We acknowledge their evolutionary purpose," she answered carefully, "but we do not celebrate them as humans do." Music drifted in from the reception area, a classical earth composition that had apparently been selected for the cross-cultural gathering. Petrov gestured toward the sound. "They've started the ceremonial exchanges. As ranking officers, we should participate." Zenara nodded stiffly, following him to the reception where pairs of humans and Tholians were engaged in a formal dance, part of the diplomatic protocol established years ago. "I believe this is where we demonstrate cultural respect," Petrov said, extending his hand in the human gesture of invitation. Zenara had studied human dancing. The theory was simple. The actual experience of placing her six-fingered hand in Petrov's, feeling the warmth of his palm against her cooler skin, was entirely different from simulations. As they moved together, maintaining proper distance while following the gentle rhythm, Zanara became intensely aware of each point where their bodies aligned. The music seemed to fade as her focus narrowed to the subtle pressure of his hand at her waist, the careful way he guided their movements. "You're trembling," Petrov observed quietly. "A physiological anomaly," she replied, her voice not quite steady. "Nothing significant." Petrov's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he didn't press further. Instead, he drew her slightly closer as the music changed tempo, a minor adjustment that sent an entirely disproportionate response through Zanara's nervous system. For the first time in her diplomatic career, Ambassador Zanara of the High Tholian Conclave found herself utterly at a loss for appropriate protocol. The emergency alarms blared throughout Stellar Station, bathing the corridors in pulsing red light as Zanara rushed toward the command center. Station personnel hurried to crisis positions, their movements practiced yet urgent. "Status report," she demanded, entering the central hub where Petrov was already coordinating the response. His uniform jacket was discarded, sleeves rolled up as he worked across multiple interfaces. "Quantum surge in the reactor core," he explained without looking up. "Automated containment systems are failing. We're looking at potential catastrophic overload in 19 minutes. Zanara moved to the environmental controls. "The Tholian delegation has emergency quantum stabilizers. I'll authorize immediate deployment." "We need more than stabilizers," Petrov responded, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes were intense with focused urgency. "The damaged core is showing harmonic resonance patterns. If we don't manually recalibrate the quantum field before deploying your stabilizers, they'll amplify the surge instead of containing it. The technical teams won't reach it in time," Zanara calculated, reviewing the schematics. "I'm going," Petrov interrupted, already moving toward the exit. Zanara caught his arm. "Commander, Tholians can withstand quantum radiation better than humans. I should go." "But you're not trained on our systems," he countered. Zanara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then we both go. Your knowledge, my physiology." For a moment, Petrov looked as though he might argue, then nodded sharply. "Suit up. We have 16 minutes." Minutes later, they hurried through evacuated corridors in emergency containment suits, carrying specialized equipment toward the reactor section. When they reached the final security checkpoint, Petrov hesitated. "Ambassador, this goes beyond your diplomatic duties." "As does your concern for my safety, Commander," she replied. "Shall we proceed?" The reactor chamber was a chaos of fluctuating energy and unstable quantum fields. They worked in practiced tandem, Petrov directing the procedures while Zanara used her natural telepathic abilities to sense the quantum fluctuations that human instruments couldn't detect. "The primary stabilization node is behind that access panel," Petrov pointed, checking his radiation monitor. "We've got maybe 3 minutes before the quantum cascade becomes irreversible." As Zanara reached for the panel, a sudden energy spike sent a shockwave through the compartment. She was thrown backward, directly into Petrov, who caught her against his chest, bracing them both against a bulkhead. For one suspended moment, despite the danger and the layers of protective gear between them, Zanara felt an overwhelming awareness of his proximity. Their faces were inches apart inside their helmets, breath fogging the transparent material. "Are you hurt?" Petrov asked, his voice tight with concern. "No," she managed, suddenly reluctant to move away from his protective embrace. "We must complete the recalibration." Working with renewed urgency, they reached the quantum stabilization controls. Petrov guided her movements as Zanara's telepathic sensitivity allowed her to make adjustments no human could perceive. When the system finally stabilized, displaying normal parameters across all indicators, they shared a look of profound relief. "We did it," Petrov breathed, his smile visible through his helmet. As emergency teams arrived to complete permanent repairs, Zanara and Petrov made their way back through the security checkpoints. Once safely through, they removed their helmets in the decontamination chamber, faces flushed from exertion and shared triumph. "That was exceptional work, Ambassador," Petrov said, running a hand through his compressed hair. "Nikolai," Zenara said suddenly, using his first name. "I think circumstances permit less formality now." He looked at her with surprise, then genuine warmth. "Zenara." Then the decontamination sequence activated, bathing them in purifying light. Zenara found herself studying his face openly, no longer pretending clinical detachment. "There is something I must acknowledge," she said, her voice barely audible above the hum of machinery. "The incident in your quarters. It affected me in ways that contradict Tholian protocols." Petrov went very still. "What are you saying?" "I have developed physiological and psychological responses to your presence that my species considers inappropriate between different life forms." Understanding dawned slowly across his features. "Are you saying you're attracted to me?" Zenara's tertiary eyelid fluttered rapidly with nervous energy. "In human terminology, yes. It is unprecedented in my experience." Petrov stepped closer, the decontamination field casting ethereal patterns across his features. "If it helps, the feeling is mutual." "It doesn't help," Zenara whispered, even as she moved toward him. "It complicates everything." "Complications," Petrov said softly, reaching to trace the luminescent markings along her cheekbone with gentle fingers, "are what make diplomatic work interesting." When their lips finally met, Zenara understood why her species had once feared emotional entanglements. The intensity threatened to overwhelm her carefully constructed control, and yet surrendering to it felt like the most natural decision she had ever made. The observation deck offered the most spectacular view on Stellar Station. Through its vast, transparent dome, the swirling nebula that had drawn both species to this region of space painted the darkness with vibrant purples and blues. Zenara stood alone at the viewing rail, her formal diplomatic attire replaced by more casual Tholian garments, flowing fabrics that shifted color with her movements and emotional states. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, already attuned to the specific rhythm of his walk. "The Tholian High Council has responded to our proposal," she said without turning. Nikolai moved beside her, his shoulder not quite touching hers as they both gazed at the cosmic spectacle. "And they are processing the implications." Zenara turned to face him, her luminescent eyes reflecting starlight. "No Tholian diplomat has ever requested a permanent assignment to human space on personal grounds." Nikolai smiled slightly. Earth's diplomatic corps is equally perplexed. Apparently, there's no precedent for a senior officer requesting joint species relationship accommodation. "We've created quite the administrative puzzle," Zenara observed, a hint of humor in her voice. A very un-Tholian quality she had begun to embrace. "Worth it," Nikolai replied simply, reaching for her hand. Their fingers intertwined, 5 human digits meeting 6 Tholian ones in a connection that symbolized everything about their unlikely relationship. 8 weeks had passed since the reactor incident and their first kiss. 8 weeks of careful navigation through uncharted emotional territory, of private moments stolen between official duties, of discovering the unexpected harmonies between their different physiologies and cultures. "What happens next?" Zenara asked, watching the nebula's slow dance across the stars. "We make new protocols," Nikolai answered, drawing her closer. "Together." And in that moment, standing at the boundary between two worlds, Ambassador Zenara knew that her view of humans, of connection itself, had been forever altered. Not by weakness, as her people might claim, but by the most profound strength of all, the courage to evolve.